Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this special event. My name is Eunice Oladejo. I'm a fourth-year political science student and a member of the Strategic Planning Steering Committee here at Western. Now, as you all know, we are gathered today to hear from the Right Honourable David Johnston as he discusses building relationships and serving our community with President Shepard. This is a timely conversation as Western is currently developing its next strategic plan and looking to set a course for a bold future. Now, before we get into that conversation, I would like to introduce Erik Mandawe as he acknowledges the land on which Western is situated. Erik is a Cree artist, musician, filmmaker, and storyteller, as well as a fourth-year medical student at Schulich Medicine and Dentistry here at Western. He's joining us today from his home in London. Welcome, Erik.
Hello and good afternoon. Danse Guakida. Bonjour, Ani, Kihakulamasi, and Sagoli. My name is Erik Mandawe. I'm originally from the Beaver Lake Cree Nation in northern Alberta, and currently find myself living in the city of London, otherwise known as Deshkanzibi, the Antler River. And as part of today's event, I've been asked to give an opening, and part of that is acknowledging the space that we find ourselves in, wherever we're tuning in from. There have been people taking care of the places that we find ourselves in for aeons since the beginning. And in the territory that we know as Treaty 6 territory, Deshkanzibi, the London Treaty, the Adawandara and the Anishinaabe peoples, the Haudenosaunee peoples, and the Lenni Lenape peoples have been taking care of this space since immemorial. And as part of our acknowledgement, as we're doing the work that we're doing in the present and into the future, it's always important to think of those generations that came before us, and in way of making room for what's going to happen next. So as part of this, I'd like to offer a song that speaks to the wisdom that our elders carry, and this song is from this territory. So when we gather and do the work that we find ourselves doing in a way of thinking about our present and our future, acknowledging our past is part of that, and thinking of all of those ones who came before us, believe it or not, they were thinking of us in this moment, and they took care of that space that we currently find ourselves in. So as part of doing this work, we're always thinking 7 generations before and always thinking 7 generations ahead. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Eunice. Oh.
Thank you so much, Erik. We appreciate you being here with us today. Now, I am delighted to introduce Alan Shepard, President of Western. Alan is an accomplished academic leader and scholar. He became Western's 11th president and vice-chancellor in July 2019. He's joining us today from his office on campus. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you, Eunice, and thank you for hosting. Erik, also thank you for the beautiful land acknowledgement and getting us started. I first met Erik when I was a candidate for this position, and he was on the team that recommended my appointment. And he stood out for me as a beautiful example of the interdisciplinary work that leads to wonderful lives, wonderful careers, doing medicine and music. That's very, very fascinating. And Eunice has been serving this year on the Strategic Planning Steering Committee, which is one of the hosts for today's session. David, welcome back. Welcome back. And David has even dug out of his closet his Western tie. And so now we're looking like twins. And we're so thrilled to have you with us. I'm going to give you the briefest of introductions. David Johnston was the 28th Governor General of Canada. And before that and after that, had a distinguished career as a law professor, public intellectual, and faculty member and Dean of Law. He served here at Western as Dean of Law from 1974 to 1979. He subsequently served 3 terms as the principal of McGill University in Montreal, and then he returned to Ontario and did 2 terms as the president of the University of Waterloo. And in all of that time, he managed to publish 30+ books. So he kept alive an intellectual life along with all of his administrative and leadership work. One of his books, which spawned this discussion today, is called Trust, 20 Ways to Build a Better Country. And that's so one of the inspirations for the discussion we're about to have. It has a number of pithy maxims, which we'll come back to, I hope. My personal favorite is called Be a Barn Raiser. So we'll come back to that. David, thank you for joining us, and thanks to everyone for joining us as well. You've always made time for your family, and I want to connect this to what Erik just said about 7 generations before and 7 generations after. Just to start us off, how are you and Sharon faring in COVID times? How are your kids? How are your grandkids? And what's going on?
Well, first of all, Alan, what a delight to be with you and to join the Western community in this way. I have such admiration for your university and had 5 wonderful years there. Our 5th daughter was born in London, and just great memories. We're doing awfully well, and we feel guilty because we're managing through this pandemic quite well. We live in a 185-acre farm, about a half-hour drive from the center of Ottawa, and we have 14 grandchildren, 5 daughters and 14 grandchildren. We've had up to 7 of those grandchildren here sequestered with us. 2 of them are twins, and their parents are both doctors in the Ottawa hospital system. And so they were kind of quarantined with us and doing their schoolwork from here, not in school. Schools were closed at that point. And the parents would come out at 6 o'clock and they'd walk the 185 acres to 6 meters away. And then we'd have dinner, usually in our screened-in porch with a little heater on, and they'd have to be in a corner, but we'd be with the grandchildren. So we've done well and feel great concern for others across the country who are not quite as well accommodated as we have been.
Yeah, it's been a complicated year for everybody. I'm thinking about the ways in which those early childhood experiences that your grandchildren are blessed to have, and all of us, the ways in which trust often starts inside families, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of some of your own early childhood, and just, obviously things went very well in your household, and just talk a bit about what were some of the building blocks of that kind of trust.
I think learning from others, Alan, would be the thing that strikes me most in my early childhood. And kind of separating up in the mind, those teachers, those coaches, those people that you admire and respect. And somehow you don't really conceptualize it very much as a youngster, as a teenager, but what is it about those people that kind of command your respect? And I think that tends to develop some of those civic virtues, and trust would be certainly one of them. And really at the root of it all is the golden rule. I remember being at the conference, economic regulation is the legal specialty area that I work in. And Robert Shiller, the economist at Yale, Nobel Prize winner, was speaking shortly after I finished, and I stayed on because I wanted to hear his latest theories on the Case-Shiller Index, etc. And to my great surprise and delight, he didn't speak about that at all. He spoke about morality and virtue of trust in markets, trust in institutions, but trust in our communities. And I thought, you know, here's a guy that won a Nobel Prize in economics, and even more fundamental for him was trust. And he said, you know, if you look at all of the great religions of the world, all of them have as the core the golden rule: do unto others as you would do unto yourself. And I think for me, as a youngster, it was coming acquainted with those kinds of me to we notions of looking beyond yourself and having a regard for people and experiences that lie beyond yourself.
What I hear in that partly, David, is a sense of gratitude. And one of the maxims in your book is honor your teachers. I'm wondering if there's a particular teacher that stands out in your memory as having made a particular contribution to your development.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Alan. My installation as Governor General was in October of 2010, and the title of my remarks was A Smart and Caring Country, a Call to Service. And I said, you know, if you remember only 3 words of what I say today, they are cherish our teachers. Because apart from our family, they're the individuals with whom we have the most contact and therefore have the best opportunity to influence. And I said, if we had a whole day in these Senate chambers, I'd tell you 100 stories of teachers, mentors, coaches, other people whose paths I've crossed, and I've been fortunate enough to see them as mentors, coaches, and learn from them. And I could tell so many stories. One I tell, in fact, I did my undergraduate work at Harvard and played some sports there and had a great time. And the coach of the hockey team was a fellow named Cooney Weiland, who had a grade 10 education from Strathroy near London. And he was the first non-Harvard graduate ever to coach a varsity team, and he had a grade 10 education. He'd been a professional hockey player. He's leading scorer in the National Hockey League with the Boston Bruins in 31, 32, 33. And that started what was later became the Kraut line, Dumarks, Bauer, and Schmidt. And we learned so many lessons of life from him, quite apart from managing ourselves in the hockey rink. And I was one of the people giving the eulogy at his memorial service in the chapel at Harvard. 500 people there, half of them staff and faculty and so on, half former hockey players. And I said, when the history of this institution is written in 100 years' time, it will be looked upon as one of the powerful instruments for good in our society. Why is that so? It's because of great teachers, and we honor one today, the hockey coach. And he was a great teacher.
Yeah, great teachers come in all flavors, for sure.
They do.
So I'm wondering if you were coming back to school this September, you're talking about your time as an undergraduate and so forth. It's been a while since you were a student. If you were coming back this September, what would you study and why?
Oh my, if you had to do it all over again, I probably would end up doing what I did do. Alan, I studied government at Harvard. They call it government, not political science. But we were so lucky because we were exposed, in fact, required to be exposed to a broad curriculum. The idea that you should be both deep and broad, that is, you should be into one area of subject matter where you could ask why questions, a bit about the unknowns in that discipline. But that you also had an awareness of disciplines around you, so that government was a social science, and I was required to take 1 or 2 humanities courses and 1 or 2 science courses. The science course that meant most to me was taught by George Wald, who was a Nobel Prize winner for saying how the eye sees, the chemistry of vision. And he taught 1,000 undergraduates in one of these survey courses. 1,000 because that was the largest classroom. If it had been a 2,000 seat classroom, he would have had 2,000 students. But why would a Nobel Prize winner be teaching a bunch of people who weren't going to become doctors or weren't going to work in natural sciences? Because he was so passionate about understanding science and understanding phenomena out of your own discipline. And I think from George Wald, I guess I learned to get your head up out of the trenches and to look around. And that was true of so many other of my professors, I think, who encouraged us to be competent in our discipline, but be well aware of things beyond and the interconnectedness of things. I think it served me well as being a general manager of universities for 27 years that you have to have some degree of knowledge from anthropology to zoology and be one or two questions deep, no more further than that, but you develop a sense of how you judge excellence and how you judge knowledge that is stimulating, etc. And that exposure of disciplines other than the one you belong to, I think, is very important.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're in the middle of a strategic planning process, and one of the key themes emerging is the need for greater interdisciplinarity, both on the research side and on the teaching and learning side here at Western. You're a keen observer of universities over a long period of time. Do you think that passion for interdisciplinary work has been building or is about the same? I mean, if you reach back to earlier in your career, was that always kind of part of the mission, or is it changing?
I think it's becoming more recognized, and the necessity becoming more real, because for any complex problem, you cannot depend upon the answer of a single discipline. We have a complex problem now in dealing with the coronavirus. I mean, it's a wicked problem, what we call really wicked problems, because there are no quote right answers. And very often, the solution you choose for a particular dilemma is the least worst alternative. It's not the best, but it's the least harmful of the alternatives you have to look at. And it really does require the ability to be comfortable in putting evidence together from beyond your own comfortable area. And, dealing with another epic period event of the last 10 years or so, the global recession in 2008, it's so important in times of crisis like that, that you be sure that you have an open mind as a leader and that you are surrounded by people who can look at things objectively and have some new ideas. The tendency in any crisis is to kind of close ranks and circle the wagons, and put up the fences and so on. And in fact, that's not what you need. You don't need to do more of the old thing. You have to do something of the new thing. And what is that new thing? And in my own life, I've learned so much from my children. All the important things in life I've learned from my children, and I learn them now again from my grandchildren. But our 5 daughters were lucky in the circumstance we lived in. They began international exchanges at age 12. In fact, we moved from London to Montreal when they were age 4 through 11, and they spoke only English but went into French schools, became bilingual quite quickly, and then they picked up other languages depending on where they'd gone in the world. But at age 12, they began international exchanges, and 4 things happened to them through that exposure and exposure to volunteer work with poverty, dealing with people with different circumstances. One, their curiosity became keener. The question why was a more penetrating kind of question. Secondly, they became more tolerant, not just in the sense of you're different from me, that's okay, nobody gets hurt, but what is that difference and what lies behind it? And thirdly, their judgment became better. They were really quick at spotting bigotry, and they wanted the other side of the story. And like a good engineer, they would triangulate, they'd look at phenomenon from 2 or 3 different angles. And speaking as the second language is important to that. To know one is to know none, I often say. But the most important value that developed was empathy. They developed a sense of not sympathy, which is I feel sorry for your plight, but empathy. I understand your situation, I walk in your shoes. And so the book that we're writing now as a sequel to Trust is called Empathy, which is such a fundamental virtue. And I guess that's, I think, why to me, minds like parachutes work best when open, and being so conscious of knowledge from other sectors, I think, is key to understanding our world and developing a humility before the vast amounts of knowledge we don't know. And for me, a sense of another. I'm a spiritual person, and faith is a part of my life. Now that too is part of the whole person, of looking beyond self.
Mhm. So the comments about your daughter's capacity for empathy and the childhood experiences they had as young adults as well goes back to our earlier point that many of these virtues that you're speaking of start in early childhood. It's very interesting that it's a building base, right? Not to say you can't
Yeah.
get there if you didn't have them, but it helps if you did have them.
Yes, in fact, the empathy book, Alan, we use an arc of my own experiences of becoming a more empathetic person. I grew up in a very modest home in Northern Ontario, and I guess I would be a type A personality and probably an achiever.
I think so.
Started to work at age 8 and so on, and that was necessity in our home. There would be a part of me that was, a very competitive athlete and a very competitive person. But then there's the other part of the person, the regard for the other. And it was really through contact with other people, and Sharon, my wife, I was her first date at age 13 in high school. And, out of love came a sense of respect for the other. And then when our children came along, that part of my, I guess, psychology or inner being really filled out that the movement from me to we is so important. And just to dwell on that a little bit, David Brooks is an op-ed writer for the New York Times, writes 3 or 4 books on the subject. One is called The Second Mountain, and he describes people climbing the first mountain, the high achievers that achieve a degree of success and have a sort of a satisfaction or happiness that comes from the regard of their peers. But he says if you're really lucky as you're climbing up that first mountain of achievement, you look over the valley to the second mountain where there are people striving upwards, very often carrying burdens and having a difficult time. And if you can find the way to reach across that valley and walk up the second mountain, your satisfaction, the happiness of the first mountain will be replaced by joy, a much more fulfilling sense. And that's been my experience of seeing these people that I admire so much who have the concern for the other and have a positive empathy in doing something about that other, and they're people of joy.
David, I can imagine that those ideas were with you when you were Governor General and you would have crisscrossed the country as well as representing Canada internationally. You would have seen everybody from the Queen to people who are really struggling in life. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of being Governor General and the ways in which you engaged with and tried to make sense of this great disparity of the world, the kind of inequality of opportunity and wealth that I know has been on your mind at various times?
Well, how privileged Sharon and I were to occupy Rideau Hall for 7 years and see the country from a different angle. The international role, which is not very well known about the Governor General, was a really important one because you have no power. You represent the head of state, the Queen, and that's a non-political institution. The head of government is our elected prime minister and the cabinet, and they do have power to do things. But we visited 56 countries in 7 years, Alan, and I felt every one of those missions was really important to Canada because we were practicing soft power. We were building personal relations, cultural relations, and a sense of Canada's place in the world, not based on size of gross national product or the number of people that wore the Canadian military uniform, but in the basic values of the country, our immigration policy, our public education system, which I hope we'll talk about a little bit. One of the great triumphs of Canada. I do believe that we have probably the best equality of opportunity of any education system in the world of quality, from preschool right on through to postdoctoral and research work. Not perfect by any means, but if you look at other jurisdictions and how they deal with equality of opportunity in education, we do well. We're not perfect and need to work at it. So that was the international one. And in the country, we traveled a lot. Fortunately, the Air Force flew us, which certainly made things really easily. You could fly to Vancouver in the morning and be and 3 other cities across the country, and be back home in your bed at 11 o'clock at night in Ottawa. We always thought this was a good country, but I never appreciated how good it was until we met people in their homes and their town halls and their municipal chambers. And one of the things we delighted most was the opposite end of the Order of Canada ceremonies. The Office of the Governor General, the Chancellor, is responsible for our honor system. And I should add, it's the least political, it's the merit-based system envied around the world because of that. And the Order of Canada, they desire a better country, is kind of our highest honor. And it would be such a thrill to be part of those ceremonies and people being recognized for the contribution they made. But Romeo LeBlanc, when he was Governor General, was looking at the other end of the book, or the other side of the spectrum, the volunteers in the community, the unsung heroes who don't get any recognition, but just year after year do the right thing. They run the food bank, they water the local rink, etc. And he started something known as the Caring Canadian Award, based on his Acadian upbringing in New Brunswick, in a very modest community. And it went well when he was there, and then it fell afoul of budget cuts. And when we came into office, I was really anxious that we did something to recognize that, the volunteers. So we reinstated it, started the Rita Hall Foundation in 2012 to help us collaborate, network, and raise funds for those kinds of things. And we raised $5 million to bulletproof that honor, so it would not be subject to budget cuts. And the Queen became aware of it, and on our recommendation, she agreed it would become the Sovereign's Medal on Volunteerism, so it'd be a Queen bestowed. And we, my last year, I think we conferred about 1,000 of those to volunteers across the country. And I'd be so moved by the ceremonies when the citation would be read for this individual, and they'd be embarrassing, really don't thank me, it's the other people. But they are the kind of the heart and soul of the country, of the community. If you want to look at the health of a particular community or neighborhood, look at the percentage of volunteers in the community as against some baseline. If it's high, it's healthy. If it's low, it's not. And that's Canada for me. And reinforcing those fundamental civic virtue qualities that I think are so important to healthy communities.
So, one of the things that gets said about institutions in Canada, universities and other institutions, government, is that there's less trust and respect for institutions than there might have been a generation ago, 2 generations ago. Do you think that's true? And if you think it's true, what should universities or other public institutions do to restore that trust?
Well, Edelman Trust tells us it's true, Alan. They've been conducting surveys for about 20 years. We have a partnership with them at the Rita Hall Foundation, both on that and also on the culture of innovation. How do you measure that in your society? And actually, in 2018, Canada, for the first time, became a distruster nation in their rankings, which meant that over half of your population did not trust government, non-governmental organizations, media, or business. Business actually came up in 2019. Government went to the bottom. During the pandemic, government has come back up to the top, but the top of a low scale, we're below the 50%. And that's not a good position to be in. And the kind of questions they ask is, if you lost a wallet in your country, would you expect a citizen to bring it back to you? And then the sub question would be, if you lost a wallet in your country, would you expect a policeman to bring it back? Interesting kinds of questions. And we have seen, I think, a diminution in so many societies around the world in trust in public institutions. It's partly, we've been through 15 or 20 years of big change. Globalization has been wrenching. The digital revolution has been very wrenching. The inequalities of wealth have become more extreme in many societies. Climate change is upon us and is creating a sense of anxiety, et cetera. Those are 4 big challenges. And, with respect to the technological revolution, we've seen the increase in technology and digital connection going in this kind of a curve, and the human ability to deal with it is a lesser curve. We haven't closed that gap as well as we should. And for me, trust is a part of that gap. So I guess to come to your question, how do you rebuild trust? I guess you recognize it's hard reading Mark Carney's latest book on values, a wonderful read. And Mark used an old cavalry expression, trust comes in on foot and goes out on horseback or goes out in Ferrari. But he's actually refined it even further. He would say trust is earned year by year. Trust is broken in minutes. And to rebuild trust is an eternity. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
To come to what universities do, I think we take justifiable pride in what we have done with education in Canada. And that is to say, you can have equality of opportunity and excellence too. Those don't negate one another, they complement one another. And if you do provide equality of opportunity for learning, for education to all of your citizenry without gaps, and ensure that that talent pool expands to its very limits, those talent limits actually increase, etc. And with it, a sense of humility that we can always do better, and the striving for excellence helps to fuel the equality of opportunity. So, I think what we do is to try to be sure that kind of institution that you lead continues to be a great center of both equality of opportunity and excellence too, in our community, in our country, and for people around the world.
Thank you for that. And these have been very lively discussions at Western and across all of our universities in Canada in recent times. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Truth and Reconciliation Report. It's a few years ago now, but it was kind of a watershed moment for Canada in its efforts to rebuild trust with Indigenous communities across the country. I'm wondering what sort of engagement you had when you were Governor General in that way.
We have a chapter in the trust book on that, Alan. I think it was the most difficult chapter to write. We wrote it 3 times. I'm not sure we still got it right. I'd be interested in Erik's view on it. Gives a chance to read it. First of all, Sharon and I are honorary witnesses to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that ceremony itself was very moving to us. And then the final report of the 3 commissioners was presented to us at Rideau Hall with a very touching ceremony, and it ended with children going out of Rideau Hall and planting paper flowers that they had made either in their school or in coming to the ceremony in the grounds of Rideau Hall, where we plant trees for visiting dignitaries, and putting these paper flowers in the ground was just a mark to say, the report is delivered, now let's make it live. And the 3 responsibilities of honorary witnesses are one, to see, to look with care. And the second is to listen. As my grandmother used to say, God gave us 2 eyes and 2 ears and just 1 mouth for a reason. And then thirdly, you go and bear witness of what you have seen and what you've heard. And in my case, it was, you have to learn, you have to unlearn before you learn. I had really very little knowledge of pre-colonial history in Canada. And Tom James and I wrote a book on innovation to try to tell the stories of innovation in the country. And we were amazed and beautifully surprised at the number of innovations that have occurred in this country before the European settlers arrived, including in the north, for example, a kayak, life jacket, igloos, the engineering, construction of, etc. Those were very revealing things to us. And more specifically about action on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I know your university in particular has looked at the recommendations having to do with education and welcomed them very enthusiastically. But one of the projects that I'm most excited about with our Rideau Hall Foundation is the Indigenous Education Gap, which, as we all know, is very, very large between Indigenous students either on reserve or not on reserve and the general population. And coming back to my 3 words, Cherish Our Teachers, we have a program of Inuit teachers whereby a partnership is struck with the Faculty of Education and working with the local community to identify children as early as primary school who have an interest in teaching, and then to support them, in some cases financially, and certainly with mentors and others, and exposure to education and teaching through high school, and then doing a B.Ed degree with a supportive community of Indigenous leaders. And we would hope that that program will scale across the country. And at the present time, the per capita representation of teachers among Indigenous people is about 1/3 of what the 6% population would suggest. I would hope that we get that well above the 6%, and teaching would be seen as a noble profession. And with the kind of mentoring and that support to see that good teaching by Indigenous people to Indigenous people could close that education gap in 10 to 15 years.
It's an important
Positive
initiative.
action that I think would be, and you know, education is really the new buffalo. I guess I could say that to Erik coming from Western Canada, where you know the buffalo was such a source of livelihood as fish were in other parts of the country, but that disappeared. The buffalo were wiped out by 1880, 1890. But it's the new buffalo, and it's the new buffalo for all of us. You know,
Yeah.
Knowledge is the key to individual sovereignty and a national sovereignty, to my judgment, in the 21st century.
So I'm just going to pick up on that, on the education piece and the innovation piece. When you were president of Waterloo, the university, in partnership with Communitech and many other groups, really accelerated, I would say, really accelerated technology and development of that side of Canada. And Canada's doing well in the efforts to be entrepreneurial minded, to think about the digital revolution, all the other kinds of technology that's coming. Do you have any advice about why that matters to Canada's prosperity? And I'm looking to the future now.
Well, you know, the general comment would be what I said earlier, the importance of equality of opportunity and excellence too, as seen through the eyes of educational institutions. I mean, there's such a responsibility to do that well for healthy communities. In the case of Waterloo, that's where the barn raising stories come from, Alan. We lived on a farm that was about a 25-minute bike ride to the university, or a 10-minute drive. And it was in Mennonite country. Mennonites came from Western Pennsylvania largely around 1800. They were the first white settlers in that area of the Grand River. And they're barn raisers. So that whenever a newcomer came into the community, the people already there would come to help to build the hut that they were going to live in, and then raise the barn. And if there were a fire, neighbors would come to put it out, get rid of the waste, etc., the ashes, and then rebuild the farm. And it was a very real story for us, because our neighbors were all horse and buggy people. And I would be trotting across the country speaking about Canada's technology transfer and the great knowledge transfer was occurring in the Waterloo region. But I'd go home at night with my neighbors who made very careful choices about what technology was useful to them and what was not. And one day, Sharon ran a 36-horse riding stable, and the insurance was always an issue. And the broker said, you know, be sure that your buildings are properly valued but not overvalued. So she was out with a clipboard looking at buildings and measuring and so on to get a value. And Edgar Shantz, who leased our land, was there in the tractor, and being Mennonite, he jumped and said, Sharon, can I help you with something? Well, you can, Edgar. You know, what price do I put on the barn here? He says, what do you mean, what price? Well, what would it cost to rebuild that barn? He said, well, why would you want to rebuild it? It's a perfectly good barn. He said, no, Edgar, if there was a fire, if it burned down, I have to rebuild it. He said, well, Sharon, if there's a fire and it burned down, we'd rebuild it. We would come over as the volunteer fire group and put out the fire if we could. And we'd come that weekend and clean up all the debris, clean the site. And then the next weekend or two, we'd rebuild it. We cut lumber on our own farms. We'd always keep woods, and we'd have all the wood for it. And he said, you know, the tin roof. We're going to have a tin roof. We don't make tin, so that's probably worth about $1,000. So put $1,000 value on it for the tin roof, Sharon. But that's our experience with our neighbors. And for me, that was the theme in Waterloo County, neighbors helping neighbors. And there was a collaboration and partnership is a fundamental theme of your strategic plan. It was there in spades in Waterloo. The community built the university. Ira Needles was running the Goodyear Tire Company, and he was chairman of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in 1957, and their theme was 150,000 engineers needed for Canada. And he gave that speech to the local Rotary Club in Kitchener. He said, well, you say we need 150,000 engineers. We're an engineering community. We don't have an engineering school. That's how the University of Waterloo got started by the community. And that notion of collaboration has been so key. And there were two other features that were based on collaboration. One was co-op education, work experience education. I wouldn't start a university today without work experience, theory and practice going hand in hand.
Yeah.
Marry one another. Each is essential to the other.
That's emerging as one of the key themes for us as well, for sure.
It is, and it's not easy because you can find the jobs somewhat in boom times, but it's carrying through the recession times. And you have to establish a partnership with your employers, governmental and private sector and so on, where they see co-op education as their best recruitment tool. And they'll stay with you thick and thin, which is key. The other thing that it was a collaborative thing was based on trust is our intellectual property policy, Alan, was creator owned. The university does not own any intellectual property.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm in a minority, I think, across North America, but I just believe that universities are not good, nor should they try to be good at commercializing intellectual property. It's not the aim. And
it's a similar policy here. I think Waterloo was one of the leaders in Canada, but Western has almost an identical policy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, finish. You're worried about time, and I'm telling too many stories. Go ahead, Alan.
No, I was just going to say the themes of I was drawn to this conversation and to your book. The themes of trust and respect, collaboration, community are just fundamental to equality of opportunity and to having success and prosperity for everyone. I'm just I'm looking at the clock, David, and you and I know each other somewhat well, and we could go on all afternoon. But we've had several hundred people tune in to hear this conversation, and we've asked Eunice if she would be the MC of some questions coming from the community. So, for my part, I'm going to say I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, as I always do, and thank you for joining us. And Eunice, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Alan. We do have a few questions to get to. Many members of the Western community were able to submit questions during the registration process, so we'll get to those now. Our first question is from a staff member. Given your vast experience generally and with higher education more specifically, what do you see as key considerations for Western as we plan for our bold future?
Well, I guess I would come back to my notion of equality of opportunity and excellence too, that those values hand in hand are really key. The second thing I would say is, and you start from a pretty good vantage point, is trust in the institution and trust in the way the institution operates. I tell my American friends that we started a tea party up here in Canada. It's the 3 T's, which are truth, transparency, and trust, all going together. I think you want your institutions to be built on those notions. And, trust is the kind of grease in the glue that it helps things move. It's the glue that holds things together, but it's the grease that eliminates friction. Stephen Covey Sr. wrote a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and his son wrote a sequel called The Speed of Trust. And essentially says trust equals cost plus speed. So if you and I know one another and have a trust relationship, we have a 5-minute conversation, we agree on something, and it's done. If we're in a transactional relationship, purchasing something, etc., and negotiating it, that A, takes more time, and B, it's more costly. And very often we have to bring lawyers like me in to develop what should be a 1-paragraph letter into a 10-page or 20-page contract, etc. All of that is, so you want your institutions, I think, to be built on trust. The third thing I would say is be daring. You have a wonderful history at Western University. You've been first in a number of areas that are really key. And I think set your sights high. of being one of the distinctive institutions in this country and in this world. And a part of that would be exposure well beyond your comfortable environs, and that would be to the world. Now, I think, Canada as a whole should be the Athens to the new Rome's, that we're not going to overcome or conquer people based on the size of our GDP or the might of our nuclear arms, thank heavens, don't have any, but based on how well we develop the talents of our people and accelerate the growth of knowledge to improve the human condition. And Western should be one of those institutions that people from anywhere in the world would covet and want to come to study or to teach at or to staff, because it is a place of trust and a place that really believes in equality of opportunity and excellence too.
Thank you for that insight, Mr. Johnston. We'll now head to our second question, which comes from a Western student. As we learn how deeply systemic racism is in Canadian culture, we require a multi-pronged educational response. Any ideas, especially in leadership, where efforts could be strengthened?
Yeah, let me just give three quick answers, Eunice, and don't let me rattle on this reading subject. One is one of the books I've recently read is a Pulitzer Prize winner called Caste, C-A-S-T-E, by Isabel Wilkerson. She's a Black woman professor at one of the prime U.S. universities. And she looks at racial discrimination, particularly discrimination against African Americans in the United States. She looks at the caste system in India, 1,000 years in the making or more. And then the third comparison, just hold on to your seats for this one, it's Nazi Germany. And the ideas and the methodology and the laws that Nazi Germany imported from the US Jim Crow type legislation in India to make their Aryan supremacy work, as it just shakes you to the core. It's an important book. I would say that the leadership is based on living diversity and inclusivity. So if you want your institution or your business or your club, etc., to be truly inclusive, you have to move from, so we used to say in a study at Dordt, from optics to outcomes. The diversity is a state of affairs. That is, what's your gender balance, etc. That's just statistics. Inclusivity is making it work. I use the metaphor of a dance. It's one thing to invite someone to the dance. That's diversity, if they're from a minority. It's another one to invite them to dance. They become involved in the activity. And if you succeed in that, in moving from diversity to true inclusivity, to bringing other people in, good things happen. If you're a business enterprise, the studies are compellingly clear that those in businesses that can actually move from diversity, state of affairs, to inclusivity are more profitable, are able to recruit and retain talent much more effectively, and are more innovative. Those things go together, and it's not just correlative, it's causative. So, what do you do as a leader yourself? Well, I think you'll live inclusivity. It's not just a word, you live it. And you recognize that a fundamental quality of leadership is recognizing your total dependence on the people around you. And that sounds like a trite saying, doesn't it? Find a parade that's going in the right direction, get yourself to the front of it or get elected, and, I'm the great winner, the great leader. It's more than that. If you're the leader of an organization, your obligation is to create an environment where everyone feels inclusive and feels compelled to add not simply their effort, but their ideas to the mix, and they're valued, etc. And good things happen when that occurs. I could go on that subject, but those are just two or three observations.
Oh, thank you for that answer. And I'm glad that you distinguish between diversity and inclusivity. I think that is a very important thing to kind of distinguish on their own. So we'll head to our third question, which comes from an alumna in Brampton, Ontario. What role does trust play in addressing mental health issues in a community?
Well, it's pretty fundamental, and it's both anyone suffering from mental illness or anyone who cares about people suffering from mental illness. One of the great obstacles that we have had, and Sharon devoted much of her time at Rideau Hall on mental health, and she has a passion and has brought me into that circle as well of dealing with it. And what we've seen, I think, especially in the last 10 years with great initiatives like Bell Talks, is to get mental health out of the closet, to recognize it as an illness like physical health is, just like that. That's one, to overcome the stigma. She organized a kind of a masquerade ball at Rideau Hall with volunteers and professionals in the mental health field. And we all came with masks, and then at a certain point in the evening, we took the masks off, and that was take the mask off mental health. Recognize that 1 in 5 of us will be clinically depressed at some point in our lifetime, and we all will know someone who's suffering from mental health. So one is the recognition, and then two, the hope that science provides. What we have seen in advances in understanding and helping to cure mental health in the last 20 years is phenomenal. We've learned as much about the human brain in the last 20 or 30 years, I think, than we've learned in the previous centuries, going back to when we began how things, and those, those opportunities to cure, to ameliorate are there for so many people. But at the basis of it, it's empathy. It's having regard for the other person and being really sensitive to seeing people that are struggling and looking for change in conduct, and don't stay silent and say, I shouldn't interfere, I should respect the privacy of that person. You say, gee, you're not talking so well, can I be helpful? That's so important. Because I'm just going to go on with a story, that sort of brings this home. When I was in Montreal, we had the Montreal prayer breakfast, which I was involved in. Mother Teresa came to speak at on one occasion, and during the breakfast, after the breakfast, we gathered with her. Some of our neighbors said, Mother Teresa, what can we do to be helpful for your work? And I expect, being the university president, she said, write a large check and I'll apply it to my shelter in Calcutta, and we'll do good work. She said, look into your own neighborhood, look in your own family, your own home. I guarantee there's someone who needs your help. And that stuck in my mind. And then the next day, the 4 Montreal newspapers carried stories of her address, which was quite, I thought, moving. And 3 of them were very laudatory. The 4th one would practice as realpolitik, tell things as they are. Said, Mother Teresa was in town yesterday. She gave a speech at the prayer breakfast and talked about her work in Calcutta. And she's a saint, probably will be canonized by the Roman Catholic Church. But let's be practical. She looks after 250 homeless people in Calcutta City, 15 million, half of whom are in abject poverty, in a country of 1 billion people with so much poverty all around. What she does is a mere drop in the bucket in relative terms. That bothered me for a long time. And then we were in London, and I remember with 5 daughters, we used to have birthday parties pretty regularly. And I would tell ghost stories, and our eldest daughter came up after and said, Dad, the ghost stories you tell, that the kids know that you're just making them up, and they just pretend to be scared because they know if they don't, it'll hurt your feelings. Why can't you be like Dean McFarlane? He does magic. Andy McFarlane was Dean of Journalism. Andy McFarlane, showing me up in Canada. So I went to a birthday party at the McFarlane house, and there was McFarlane, the magnificent, dressed in a big cloak, top hat, mustache, and he had a wand, and he was doing card tricks, and the kids were absolutely mesmerized. And then I saw him, he held up a glass of water, clear water, and in his sleeve he had an eyedropper, and in it was 1 drop of red vegetable dye, and he held it up, and he dropped the drop of vegetable dye in the water and said abracadabra, and shook the water, and the clear liquid turned to a beautiful shade of rosé. And the light went on. I thought, Mother Teresa's drop in the ocean. I was thinking of it in mathematical terms or physical terms. I should have been thinking it as chemistry, because when that molecule or molecules of red dye interacted with the H2 molecules, they changed their culture, they changed their nature, they turned to rosé. And that's what you do with these acts of kindness, and that's what you do when we reach out to help people with mental health issues. We change the culture, and there's a ripple effect to just change the metaphor across the pond, where other people pick up the idea, and all of a sudden it becomes common.
Thank you. That was a very good story to explain that answer. So we'll now head to our last question, which comes from an alumnus and staff member. How do we demonstrate economic return on investment to Southwestern Ontario? So things like knowledge transfer, patent creation, intellectual property, healthcare provision, and so on.
A very simple answer is early on when I came to Waterloo in 1999, we wrestled with that. We did our strategic planning, and we had a very good relationship with the community, but we were anxious to demonstrate that in economic terms, and we actually did a study of return and the multiplier effect of a dollar put into the university would produce X dollars in output. It was a professor from McMaster that had the particular methodology that we used, and we showed a 5-time multiplier effect. So if you pay $5,000 of tuition in a given year, Eunice, that would have a ripple effect of $25,000 in the community within an X period of time, or an operating grant, et cetera. And Alan, I think you may have been at Ryerson at the time, or maybe even before that. We made that methodology available to all of the universities in Ontario and said, have this study done. It can be done fairly quickly, and then give a speech at your Chamber of Commerce and have your local media pick it up, because it's so compelling. And the investment in higher education in terms of the quality of life as well as the quantity of life in a community is so important. I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, and a university came to that town when I was a young law student working at the steel company. I actually carried the charter documents to the registry office and said, I helped to create that university, carrying the documents. But that was very important to that community. And in Waterloo, we had so many stories of that kind. One of them was we brought a school of pharmacy to the downtown industrial area that had been totally decimated by post-World War II movement of manufacturing. Textiles, furniture, leather, boots, beer, distilled spirits, tires, automobile parts, all disappeared in a period of 20 or 30 years. And it was a wasteland. And as the first initiative in the renaissance of that industrial heartland, the city of Kitchener gave us reclaimed land, which was contaminated, and $30 million to build a school of pharmacy. And I remember when I shook Carl Zero's hand, the mayor, I said, Carl, this will be the best investment you ever made. And that was the beginning of the R&T park in the center of the city of Kitchener. If you go through there now, it's just unbelievable, the burgeoning things. The next thing that happened was satellite medical campus of McMaster University. And why would you begin with a school of pharmacy and a school of medicine when what you wanted was more, artificial intelligence, et cetera? Because it was all about talent and knowledge. And I said to Carl, the return on investment will be this, Carl. You've given us $30 million plus land. We will bring in $30 million a year in tuition fees and operating grants and research grants that our professors will win in external competition. That money will be spent in the community with the kind of multiplier effect I mentioned a moment ago, 5 times. But quite beyond that, this will be an intellectual renaissance based on talent and knowledge in downtown Kitchener. And that's exactly what happened. It's absolutely burgeoning right now. And we built a research and technology park on the university campus with the same kind of collaboration. And I could go on with that story, but that made a big difference. And it was all about fundraising.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Johnston. Well, folks, that's all the time that we have here for today. I wish we had more time to hear your stories and insights, because this has been a really great conversation. Thank you to President Shepard and to Erik Mandawe for providing us with an land acknowledgement. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions for discussion today. A recording of this event will be available in the coming days on the Strategic Planning Steering Committee website at strategicplan.uwo.ca. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Have an amazing day.
Great to be with you, Eunice. Bye, Alan. Bye, Erik.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Bye.
Thank you, Eunice. Thank you, Erik.
God bless.
Yeah, take care.